I think we'll spend less time on the technological aspect and we'll spend less time in sort of the data analysis aspect that the technology can handle. And it'll free us human beings up to really just be more creative, think outside of the box a little bit more, and really get down to solving problems and not having to worry about so much the execution of the solutions to those problems.
Hello, and welcome to Speaking of Supply Chain, where we explore trends, current events, and innovations impacting the logistics and supply chain industries. I'm your host, Ellen Wood. Artificial intelligence is reshaping the way we work. From automating mundane tasks to revolutionizing entire industries, AI is changing the landscape of the workplace. Join us as we chat with Michael Walker from SmythOS, who is going to shed some light on the opportunities and challenges that AI presents for future workforces. Welcome to Speaking of Supply Chain, Michael.
Thank you, Ellen. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you taking the time.
Now, did I pronounce that right? It is SmythOS?
It's Smith, actually.
It is Smith.
Instead of an I, it's with a Y. Yes. Yes.
Okay, so SmythOS. So I'm looking forward to our topic today and all of the insight that you're going to bring to us about AI in various industries, but specifically in the supply chain. But first, let's get to know you a little bit better. Our icebreaker question for today is, would you rather explore outer space or the bottom of the ocean?
It's a great question. It's a really good question. This one's difficult for me only because I am a certified rescue diver. So I've done a lot of scuba diving and I love the ocean. So part of me wants to say space just because like how many people have explored space, right? And but that being said, we've explored like such a small fraction of our ocean, something that's right beneath our feet that it's super cool and interesting. So if I could do either, it's a huge win, but I think I'd say space just because it's something cooler to brag about, I think.
That is so interesting. You are the first guest I've had that is also a scuba diver. So I learned how to scuba dive when I was 14. And by the time I was 18, I was an assistant instructor and I worked at a scuba diving shop, which you wouldn't think there would be that many of them here in the Midwest. But there was, and I happened to work there and it was a lot of fun. And I even just a couple of weeks ago got together with some of my old scuba diving friends and instructors that I hadn't seen in a long time. And we were looking at photos and all the things that we've done and all the places that we've explored. And I agree. I think the ocean has so much to teach us about our planet, and we're still learning. We're still discovering things within our grasp, truly within our grasp. But it's fun that I've got another diver on the show. I've never had that. So what kind of rescue diving have you done? Because that can get difficult. Is it rescuing like old wrecks and raising things that have fallen into the water that aren't supposed to be there?
No, much more tame than that, I would say. So I lived in Cambodia for 2 years actually, and I lived on an island called Koh Rong. So I learned to dive there. I worked at a dive shop there. So we would have groups of volunteers that would come in every couple of months. And we had like an artificial coral reef project that we would do around the island. So we were trying to like repopulate the coral reef that had died over the previous decades while we were there. And then we would have, obviously we'd run like certification programs. And so I was always along as a rescue diver just in case, anything went wrong, which 9 times out of 10, it doesn't. But I also have the dive shop employee background. So that's cool. I don't meet many other fellow divers either. So very cool. At least not in the marketing world, right? In the traveling world, a little more common.
Exactly. I think we're just out of our element here. We're too far away from the water.
There you go. I like it.
Getting back to our conversation today, we're going to be talking about AI. And I've talked about AI on the podcast with a couple different guests. We've talked with Pete Gret from BlackRock about AI. We've talked with Michael Greenberg from Third Brain Digital. And we're talking about it again because this topic is so pervasive. It is such a huge component to anything these days, much less supply chain. So what is going on right now in AI in the workplace? Because it is absolutely exploding. We can barely keep up with it. What's the current thing?
Yeah, I think if you ask me that question tomorrow, and then again Thursday and Friday of next week, there will be three different answers because it seems that's how fast that it moves at the moment. But I think what we're seeing more than anything in a tech space or any sort of tool related is like almost a new renaissance happening around AI. Like it can free up a lot of your autonomous and repetitive tasks so that we as individuals can get back to doing what we do really well, which is creativity and ingenuity and more on the humanities and the arts side of things, and really let the AI do the data analysis and looking at repetitions and diving into the data and that sort of thing. So I would say where we are today is still at a place of early understanding. And you'd be surprised that at SmythOS, we work with some of the largest corporations out there. And even those companies are still at the very early stages of understanding and how do we implement and how do we bring this into our technology and ensure security and all of that sort of stuff. So today, I think everybody's probably in the same spot, which hopefully is comforting to most people, which is, I don't know. Right? We're all getting to learn every day more and more. What is AI? How does it work? How can I utilize it? And then I think we'll get into this today, some of its applications, but we're still all just in a learning phase. I think that's how I'd summarize it.
There are a lot of misconceptions out there right now. There's a lot of confusion and a lot of gray area when it comes to, the jobs that AI is taking over. And you mentioned, it's doing the data analysis. It's doing all of the repetitive and easily programmable tasks. But a lot of that, I know I've talked with some of our previous guests about, this is taking away a lot of those learning experiences from that newer generation of workers where, when we came into these careers, we had to do a lot of the scut work, a lot of the research and the understanding of the data and manipulating and making sure we understood it. And that was a learning process for us. Now, if we're teaching AI to do it, then we've got to teach not only these young workers and our future workforce how to do these things using the AI, obviously, but then to make the decisions based on it. Are they going to be prepared to make the decisions without having that base knowledge of understanding how the data was brought together and manipulated and understood and read? Or are we just going to have to kind of gloss over that and say, okay, it's like a calculator. It's doing something that you learned how to do a long time ago, but it's not necessary to do that in your head anymore or do that manually.
Yeah, it's really dependent on the industry, the company, and then the job. I think what I would say from a summary standpoint is, number one, there's not a whole lot of reason to fear, right? I know that there are some loud voices in the space, and maybe I won't name names, but I think that most people would associate with AI, and I think they make it seem like this really scary figure in the room, right? Like, am I able to understand it? Is it overly complicated? Is it coming from my job? Like, am I going to have to relearn a skill and halfway through my career that maybe I'm not able to do very well? I don't think that's the case at all, right? It's like, we used to have town criers, right? Who would go out and they would literally stand in the town square and tell everybody the news from the last week or the last month or what's going on and what's happening. And then the printing press came along and then people had newspapers. But that created new jobs, right? Where you had reporters, right? And you had people who would write and then people would distribute the papers. And so I think this is a similar sort of evolution. And I think you don't have to understand every single element of the process, right? Like if you just know what you do really well and you understand how to utilize AI or particular AI type tools to help augment your job rather than replace what you're already doing, then you're already ahead of the curve and there's not much more to manage. It's very similar to, I like to say, when internet marketing became a thing, right? That used to be a term, right? Internet marketing. And it just meant I could use this device and go online and I could market my business. Now there's not really such a thing, right? There's paid advertising and SEO and SEM and retargeting and remarketing and influencer and social media. It's very similar. Today, I think the term AI is what people know and understand. And so from that comes a lot of kind of confusion. And like you're saying, do I have to understand data analysis? Do I have to be afraid I'm going to lose my ability to do these things? And the short answer, I think, is no. I think if you understand the technology, you embrace it, you learn the tools as they come in, and figure out how they work best for you as an individual and as an organization, then you can only benefit from it in the long term.
So, what key skills do you think are going to be valuable using that AI augmented workplace? I mean, we've got the technical skills, obviously. Depending on which AI platform you're using to support your business, whether it's internal, whether it's an open source, you're going to need to understand how to work with that tool. But what are some of the even some soft skills that are going to be more important when AI is doing a lot of that, analysis work?
Yeah, believe it or not, I don't think it will change a lot from the soft skills you need today. Things like critical thinking and problem solving, things like emotional intelligence, all the things that can make you successful as an employee from a soft skill standpoint, I think are the same. When it comes to the technology, like you mentioned, there are, like at SmythOS, we have a whole certification program. So you can come in, you can get certified on the platform as an AI agent engineer. It doesn't require any development or coding experience because it's all drag and drop. And so now your operations manager can build AI agents that will help them do their job better. Your HR manager can build a series of agents that can help them do their job better. So from a soft skill standpoint, I think what we'll really see kind of rise to the top are the creative elements. So the emotional intelligence, the creativity, the empathy, those are the sort of things that I think as artificial intelligence and technology gets more adopted at a mass scale, those are the things that are going to stand out for as an employee to an employer and as an organization or a brand to your customer base. So those are things that have always been important. I just think they'll be more so over the coming, 2 to 5 years.
So really building up that personal and the human element in those jobs. If we've got a machine taking over the machine stuff that the machine can do, then building up those interpersonal skills are going to be just as important or even more important, because we don't have that need for the mechanical skills. So we don't have to, the technical skills are going to be there. They're always going to be there. But that person to person is where the value is going to lie.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about it, it's like if I want to go to my boss and suggest a new technology or tool or ask for more budget, whatever it may be, I need to have all those soft skills. I have to be able to communicate well, understand how what I'm asking for can translate into real business results, maybe take a creative approach or a critical thinking approach to problem solving. What problems are these going to solve? We'll just spend more time doing those sorts of things, because I think we'll spend less time on the technological aspect and we'll spend less time in sort of the data analysis aspect that the technology can handle. And it'll free us human beings up to really just be more creative, think outside of the box a little bit more, and really get down to solving problems and not having to worry about so much the execution of the solutions to those problems.
So you mentioned that you do a lot of training and getting people onboarded onto your platform. What are some of the common challenges that individuals face when they're learning this new skill, this new tool?
Yeah, number one is anxiety for sure. I think most people, it's a new technology, it's scary. We hear so much, like you wouldn't believe even the number of students who, and some of them are high school students, some are college students who will write in on a contact form and say, "Hey, I'm studying this, or I want to major in this. Should I still do it? Like, will this still be a job, or is AI going to replace this?" Like, so many people have so much anxiety around artificial intelligence that mental block is probably the biggest challenge to start. Then of course there's some skill gaps, and when I say skill gaps, I mean like technologically speaking and platform wise, but it's no different than CRMs, right? Before CRMs, we were all managing our data and customer relationship data and spreadsheets or Excel or in a ledger or whatever it may be. And then at some point you had to make the jump into CRMs. But once you learned one of them, it's pretty easy to transition to other ones, right? Understanding like the hierarchy of data, How do I input data and keep the records there and that sort of thing? And I think this is the same thing. So the biggest challenge is definitely the mental block of kind of having some anxiety around, is this for me? Can I do it? Should I be a little bit afraid of it? And then number two is a skills gap because it's brand new technology. But what I tell most people is it is just as new to me and to the people I work with as it is to you. So you're not too late. There's nothing to be anxious about. We're all learning together and we're all in the same boat.
Well, but to your point, when you get those students, emailing in on your contact form saying, "Should I even bother majoring in this in college?" I mean, earlier you said tomorrow the answer is going to be different. Next Thursday the answer is going to be different. So we can tell these kids, maybe. It's gonna resemble it. You're gonna have some use for that education. It's not wasted. But at the same time, what you think you're going to be doing today is probably not what you're going to be doing in 5 years when you graduate. So, I mean, how do we alleviate that level of anxiety while being honest about the fact that this is changing and we have no idea what it's going to look like in 5 years, what this landscape is going to be?
Yeah, I think it's and maybe I'm overly optimistic in some sense. That could very well be the case. But I think businesses have always faced the same challenges, whether it was 100 years ago, a decade ago, or a month ago. And that is, how do I stand out? How do I make sure that the people who are experiencing the problem I'm solving know that I exist? And then how do I make sure that my customers or my client base, whoever it is happy and want to continue to do business with me? I think if you keep that in mind from a professional standpoint and you just study something that you're passionate about and that you don't mind spending your time doing, the rest of it falls into place. The tools of the trade will always change, right? Like I don't think I could do mental math today if you force me to, right? Because I haven't had to do it since high school. But the fact is, I always have a calculator in my pocket with a phone. So if I just understand what numbers do I need to add together or multiply together to get the answer I'm looking for, then I'll have the tools to do it. And I think this is a similar thing. So if you're passionate about working in technology, going into supply chain, whatever it may be, as long as you study what you're passionate about and you understand just the basics of solving problems and how to help a business, achieve whatever goals that they have, then, the tools of the trade are always going to change. The only constant there is that will remain the same. And, you'll be able to overcome and learn those. I think personally, that's the easy part.
So I agree. It's just going to be a tool. But this is a tool that we're training to think. We're training to look for certain, aspects, certain key data points, certain whatever, and to make decisions or to come to conclusions based on that data. So as it becomes more integrated into our work, what are some ethical considerations that we should be mindful of?
Yeah, absolutely. So from an organizational standpoint, I think the obvious starting point is data security, right? It really doesn't matter what kind of company you are. I mentioned CRMs before. We store, like every one of us as individuals has so much of our personal data out there on the internet, whether we like it or not, and companies house that data. So when you're using AI, which when we say AI right now, we really are talking about a series of large language models. We want to make sure that any data we give to that or whatever tools we're using to analyze our data has security and compliance built into it, right? So that our data is not being shared, our customers' data is not being shared, it's not being leaked. That's the first one. Then, of course, I think there's a lot of kind of ethical governance and oversight that I think industries and possibly even governments are going to have to start to consider, right? Is if we start to allow artificial technology to make decisions for us, what's the moral compass for some of those decisions? Like when you start thinking of, supply chain, if we're talking about from a NGO standpoint, right? And we're talking about, let's say, food distribution for international NGOs, for example, if you leave that to a series of large language models to make decisions on, well, how are you sure that there's the right moral foundation for how those decisions are being made? And that's a very clear kind of downfall in one sense of artificial intelligence is it doesn't have that empathetic and moral foundation that us as human beings do. So those are the two things that I think in the near term we're going to have to really kind of talk about as an industry and just make sure that we have the right solutions in place and the right infrastructures and guide rails to make sure that we're making sure that everything we do is secure and we're not releasing people's information. And then number two, that we have some sort of ethical and moral foundations so that we can guide these models and let them know here's what is a clear ethical boundary or here's a clear moral boundary. And so anything that we do or decisions we make have to be within those guidelines.
So that brings the human back into the equation of using the AI tool and then having to make a decision using that moral compass, using that ethical consideration. Is it possible that we will get to a point that we'll be able to program that into the AI models?
Yeah, well, I think right now the fail-safe for that, or the kill switch, if you will, are people like you and me. I think we're probably still a ways away before any organization leaves sole decision-making power to an AI model. And I think that's probably a good thing today. I think that most people are using these tools like a SmythOS to help them augment what they're already doing rather than replace individuals or functions within their organization. So in that scenario, it'll be people like you or myself who are sitting down and looking at the data analysis that a particular model has done, for example, and saying, okay, now with that analysis done, here's how I'm going to interpret it, and then here are the decisions that would be made from it. So I think as long as we, in the mid to near term, have that human being in place that are making the final decisions, we don't have to worry too much about, is this model going to run off the rails? Is it going to make a decision and send that decision out to 4,000 people before anybody looks at it? It's the onus is still on us to kind of make those decisions.
Sure. Well, and I think getting back into the data protection and the security that you were talking about as well. When we're talking about these different AI models, you can't just take your customer data and go out to a chat GPT because, that's open source. They're using that data not only to generate what it is that you're trying to achieve, but also to teach itself. And then they have your data. And so companies like yours that offer these platforms and these models that can do it more, I don't want to say privately or internally, but that really is the case where it's a closed source and you're able to input your data and teach the algorithm what you're trying to achieve with this data, in order to have that level of security. But then, how are all these models learning from each other? I think that's the question of, is one model going to take over the industry where other models are going to lag behind? And what sort of ethical questions does that pose? Is the information of what is capable still going to be governing all of the possibilities out there? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great question. Probably. So it's. I'm trying to think if there's any question we could ask more. If this isn't the top question, it's definitely number two. Is exactly that. So any large corporation. Any corporation or industry that has ties to the government, even there are so many industries that have regulation around it where they can't deploy into the cloud, right? So open source, first and foremost, is kind of a non-starter for a lot of these companies for the reason you mentioned, but also cloud deployment. Because in a cloud scenario, you have to take all of your data, give it to the cloud. That can be accessed maliciously, right, through means of hacking, by accident. Anyone who has access to the cloud can download it locally. So any cloud deployment is an issue. What we've done to try to address that is we've built what's called a local runtime environment. So if you are a large transportation company, you have contracts with the government or multi-corporations that have strict security and compliance standards. We have our agent builder, which is where you can bring multiple models together So you're not reliant on anyone. You can connect any of your internal applications. You can build models on OpenAI, which is ChatGPT, on Anthropic, which is Claude. You can bring them all together for the AI orchestration, as it's called. But then you can essentially download those agents and you can run them locally. You can run them on your own servers, on your own AWS servers, on-prem, as we call it. And in that scenario, you don't have to release any of your private data to the cloud. So you can ensure that it's secure. So you can still use technologies like SmythOS to build these agents that can be used to optimize your business in many different ways without having to risk the security of your data by deploying it into the cloud, by using something like a local runtime environment. So that's one of the ways that we've tried to address it. And I think for now, at least as it stands in a very cloud native world, that's probably one of the first places to start if you're an organization that's concerned about that.
So what are some new exciting career opportunities that are emerging due to these AI advancements? What's new and up and coming on the horizon for this new talent workforce?
Yeah, I think there's two that come to mind. Number one are AI agent engineers. There have been so many studies done by Goldman Sachs, Gartner, pretty much every foundation, business and marketing foundation out there on the number of agents compared to employees over the next 10 years. And you'll find anywhere from 1 to 5. For every employee, there will be 1 to 5 agents who are deployed to help those employees do their jobs. And so obviously somebody needs to be able to build those agents, right? So AI agent engineers will be number one. And again, I think it's not as scary as it sounds. Tools like Smith can help you do that without being a developer, without having to learn to code. But number two, and this is, I think, the long-term opportunity is what we call MACE engineers or multi-agent systems engineers. So as AI sort of gets more into a more mature state, you'll have a lot of different custom agents and applications. You'll have obviously businesses who build, the next version of ChatGPT, where instead of a single model, it's multimodal and these sorts of things. You need to bring those all together, right? So when you have these multiple connection points of different AI tools and different AI systems, that's what we call a multi-agent system in artificial intelligence. And that's where systems can speak to one another, learn from one another. They can call upon one another to complete these large and complex tasks. And you need engineers who can put those things together. So those multi-agent systems engineers, I think, are going to be in incredible demand over the next probably 2 to 5 years and beyond. And I think those are just two. Those are just two of the starting points.
I know. I think of, just let's say 2 years ago, a systems analyst or a data analyst was such a small thing. And then it got this huge boom. And now we're replacing it with an AI that can do the same thing, that can analyze that data. So, I believe that there's going to be a number of different iterations of professions or job titles or whatever you want to call it, skills that people need to learn and jobs that need to be filled, that as we grow and as we learn how to use these tools most effectively in our society, these jobs are going to evolve very, very quickly. And so I think the thing to tell our students right now, and the thing to tell the up and coming workforce, is be flexible, be willing to learn, be willing to challenge yourself, and be willing to try and work with these tools, because it's going to be exciting. You're getting in on the ground floor of a new technology. It's kind of like the tech boom back in the 90s. And this is your chance to do it. This is your generation's opportunity. So what are some maybe success stories or epic fails? Either are excellent stories, but what's something that you can tell us about, a client that you've worked with or a deployment that you've done that was able to make a huge difference?
Yeah, absolutely. There's, on a personal level, I have probably 1,000 fail stories that I could share while I was trying to learn how to really become more of an AI agent engineer myself. But on the success side, so we work with a client called Halo. This is Halo Dog Collars, a company started by Caesar Milan, who's the dog whisperer, and a Stanford grad named Michael Ehrman. And they have utilized artificial intelligence to connect a lot of their kind of inventory management with their product and ordering, and then their customer service. And the way we've deployed that early on is through a chat agent. So you can come to the website, you can ask questions about your order, questions about delivery time, updates, connect with customer service, sort of do all of that in real time with AI without having to wait on the phone for a customer service representative or wait while they're searching for more information. And one of the reasons that's so important is in the customer service world, you want to try to de-escalate those types of concerns as much as possible, right? And the last thing you want when you're kind of frustrated with an order or trying to speak to customer service is to be transferred from person to person or department to department or not get the answers you're looking for. This is an area where AI is just such a great place to start today because the technology is already there. The use case has been proven and it works really well. So I'd say that's probably one of our earlier success stories, but we've seen it across so many different industries that it's pretty agnostic to industry.
And I will ask this question just for personal, because I use the open source GPTs. We're testing some different things internally with some internal platforms at work, but even just for fun, to use AI or ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or whichever one, what have you done for fun with AI just to see what it can do?
Yeah, I'll my wife will probably see this, so she'll know my secret here soon, but date night ideas is a great one, right? Like just on a personal note. So when you are looking for a new restaurant in town, for example, but with a little bit different kind of experience, or looking to do something different in the city you've lived in for a while that you maybe haven't had a chance to try before, that's a really great way to use something like ChatGPT. In a more boring sense, I use it for organizing almost everything that I do. I have found that these large language models are really great at going from 0 to 1 in a creative sense. So if I'm staring at a blank screen and I'm trying to write, let's say, some website copy or some emails or something like that, it can be so hard to go from a blank page to even the first 5 or 10 words. Right. But if I go into a ChatGPT or my favorite, which is Anthropic's Claude, I can go from 0 to 1 very quickly, and it creates the spark. It gets things moving. It allows you to kind of get your creative process underway. And to me, I have a ton of fun like that. So both on the personal and professional sides, those are two ways that I use it that maybe could be helpful to other people out there.
I know I use it for the same reason, to generate some idea, to get those creative juices flowing. I mean, in marketing, we have to generate a lot of content. And so sometimes it feels like you're writing the same thing over and over and over and over. And you're like, okay, try and do this in a new tone. Read this back to me, or give me this prompt in someone else's voice. Pretend like you're Sylvester Stallone, or pretend like you're Tom Cruise, or pretend like you're whomever. And, give me this back in their tone of voice from this character that they played. Or, in one thing that I've done that is not in AI, but I've used it to kind of prompt myself to try something different and look at something from a different angle. I'm a huge Harry Potter fan. I've read all the books, watched all the movies. I love Harry Potter. But in thinking about it one time, I realized, that these books took place in the 90s, and these kids grew up at the same time that, I grew up and was their age. Another show popular in the 90s, Saved by the Bell. So one time when reading through the series again, I pictured all of the cast of Harry Potter as the cast of Saved by the Bell. And that tone of voice, that idea, that that feeling of that high school situation as opposed to the high school at Hogwarts. So, I mean, those types of things where you just reimagine it in a different perspective, a slightly different twist to it. And that's where you get those creative juices flowing. And no, that is not going to help me in any way, sense, or form professionally, except that that's going to get my own creative juices flowing. That's going to get me thinking and looking at a problem from a different angle. And I think that's one of the great things that some of these content generators, even the open source ones, are able to do with very little risk. I mean, who's going to care if I decide to have this recipe read back to me in the tone of some other celebrity or influencer? It's going to give me a laugh. It's going to give me an idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I do something very similar with the great Michael Scott, the world's best boss from The Office. So if I'm having a little bit of a routine or mundane day, I'll put something in there with the little character I've created in ChatGPT for Michael Scott and have it tell me a joke, right? A little pick me up for the day. But I think that's the humanizing and really the beautiful side of artificial intelligence. And I hope that more and more people kind of look at it that way and see it that way, which is it's probably the most or one of the most useful things or advancements we've seen in a really, really long time, my lifetime, almost certainly. But it can also be a beautiful thing to help you discover and explore, help you cheer you up if you're in a down mood, which can be a tremendous benefit, both personally and professionally. So I think us just getting more familiar with these tools and being more comfortable using them can do a lot. It can help reduce the anxieties. It can improve life in even the smallest amounts in so many different ways. And the more we all collectively kind of raise our knowledge and understanding and close the knowledge gap between where we are now and where AI is of, let's say, next month, the better we all will be for it, right? Then we can adopt it quicker. We can have better conversations around them. We can discuss the ethical and moral dilemmas around them because people really have a better understanding and intellect around what AI really is. And it's no longer I fear it because I don't understand it or don't know it sort of thing. So yeah, I love that example.
Well, and I think you bring up an excellent point again with the ethics and the morality is, when we're doing these things and being creative and stepping outside the box and getting it to pretend to be someone it's not, then there is that human element back to the beginning of our conversation where there has to be a human at the end of this reviewing whatever this output is, understanding what it is that it's trying to tell you, because you can't just go in and create content in the voice of someone else and pretend to be that other person and plagiarize in that way, or in what's the word I'm looking for? Impersonate someone else, because first of all, that's wrong. It's morally wrong. We understand that, but it also has the downside of not actually being that intelligent. It has limitations, and it can do things that it knows based on what's out there, what's open source information, but it's not going to have that decision-making capability. It's not necessarily going to have the same, even vocabulary as some of those individuals. I remember seeing a clip recently of Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he was saying, this AI had generated something that he might have said, but it used different vocabulary. So he realized very quickly that it wasn't actually a quote that he said, because it's not the way he would have said it. And I think that brings us back to there always has to be a human sitting behind the desk, making the final decision based on whatever the AI does, because we can't let it just go out and do things. It can do a lot of the thinking. It can do a lot of the manipulation of the information, but it can't be the final say. It can't be the final decision.
Yeah, and there's real world examples of where this is incredibly important. Like Tesla famously had, and every self-driving car, autonomous vehicles had to sit down and consider this, right? Which is like if your car's driving straight and it's about to hit two pedestrians, and the only option is to turn right and hit one pedestrian, and those are the only options. Like what should the car be programmed to do and consider, right? And the world's best minds and ethics and morality, and they all came together and had to discuss these things, because ultimately we're the ones, at least for now, behind the keys when it comes to this stuff, right? And we have to tell these models, and we have to tell them, here's what to consider, here's how much weight to give to consideration A versus B. So you're absolutely right. At least for the very foreseeable future, we're the ones making the decisions on these things. But again, I think it comes back to why it's just so important for everyone to dive in and start getting familiar, even if you only use it in your personal life or you only use it in your professional life, because eventually these are things that are going to affect every single one of us, right? Is how AI is used, whether it's for surveillance and route planning and, all sorts of different things. And the more knowledgeable we all are about it, then, the better conversations that we can have. And then hopefully, ultimately, the better decisions that we can make as a group and as a society.
Well, and I think you brought up an excellent use case of the chatbot on a website. When you go and you have a question for a company or something that you've done, how many of us don't realize that those chatbots have been run by AI for so long behind the scenes? It's not some person sitting there typing back and forth with you. In most cases, now there are some that do, but in most cases, those chatbots where you're just asking a question are delivering information based on the database of information that they have about their company. And so we've been interacting with these this whole time without even really thinking about it or realizing it. And the more we pay attention to it, the more we'll understand its capabilities and its limitations.
That's exactly right. And even before that, you call your bank and all of a sudden you have automated menus, right? Press 1 for this and 2 for this and say a word. And so this is technology I think a lot of people are at least in some way, shape, or form familiar with. But when it comes down to even the organizational level, if you think of, my grandfather was a long haul truck driver, right? So I could only imagine if he had the ability for enhanced route optimization, right? Even another use case that we've looked at with, I'll just say a government entity, is predictive maintenance, right? To make sure that you ensure the least amount of downtimes for delivery vehicles and things like that. Like, there's so many real world applications that are there today and that can be used today. That it's really just a literacy thing. It's an AI literacy. If we can make sure that our organizational leaders have as much information and knowledge on this as possible, and then the individuals who are using them have the same thing, then we can all move forward in the right direction.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us today and talking a little bit more about AI and where it's going to take our talent workforce in the future. For our guests out there, or for our listeners out there, if you have a suggestion for a topic or would like to be a guest on the show, we'd love to hear from you. You can contact me at podcast@mebach at any time. As always, thank you for listening to Speaking of Supply Chain. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on whatever podcast platform you prefer: Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And be sure to tune in next time.